am a podcaster, a daily podcaster. I am a podcaster, a float tank podcaster. Answer salty questions, gonna learn some lessons. The daily solutions, gonna rock your nations.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm Graham.
And I'm Jake.
And once again, no Ashkahn for right now. Instead, we are going to keep tearing through construction questions that you send in. And today's construction question is, I've heard STC and decibels mentioned when I bring up soundproofing. Which should I pay attention to? Which is more important? Well, I would say they're both important. They kind of measure different things. And especially STC is not really, well, I guess neither of them are really as simple as you'd wish they were. But STC gets a little complicated. So kind of basically the difference here is decibels are the noise. That's the volume of sound that's reaching you. And STC is it stands for sound transmission class. And that's how much noise is being stopped between
how much noise is
between
being attenuated in between two spaces.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Like how loud is something is decibels, and then how much sound are you blocking is STC. So in the context of a float center, you might hear decibels mentioned for. You're right near a noisy street. Those cars are producing some mad decibels.
Right.
To use, street slang.
Mad decibels. Or there might be construction down the road and industrial noise. That definitely adds.
Yeah, whoa, those are some blasting decibels out there, people might say to you. Whereas, with STC, it's like, we got to attenuate those mad decibels.
Those are some quiet walls.
Yeah, slap in some STC with some slap in some STC. That doesn't make any sense. Slap in some walls with some kickin' STC was what I was trying to lay down there. You picking up what I'm putting down?
I'm picking up what you're putting down. Smelling what you're stepping in.
So that's the basics for it. And there's of course some more details to go into for both
absolutely.
of them.
I mean, this is a deep rabbit hole. First off, the scales, both of them logarithmic. So when you're jumping up, it's quite a large jump. It's in between the two. It's 1 to the 10th, and then to another 10th, and to another 10th from there. So noise can get very loud very quickly, and blocking out sound can get very well done, very very high ranges.
Yep, and just in case it's been a while since you took a math class, logarithmic just means it's going up by a multiplicative factor rather than just an additive factor. So it's not just if you have 10 decibels and then 20 decibels, you might think, that's twice as loud, but in fact it's 10 times as loud.
Right.
And then same goes from there. From then 20 to 30 is again 10 times as loud, or 10 times as many in the decibel scale. It gets a little confusing for how we hear things. There's this whole thing between sound being emitted, sound going through the air, our ear perceptions of sound, which involve different parts of anatomy that vibrate different ways. So we're just going to give you the mile high view on this stuff, both because this is a short form podcast, and also we're not experts. We deal with this stuff on
acoustical engineers.
Or acousticians.
Or acousticians, and do not make the mistake.
Yeah, we had an acoustical engineer get angry with us when we called him an acoustician once.
Yeah.
He straightened his tie and told us in no uncertain terms that he was an acoustical engineer, not an acoustician.
All right, well, some things about these two different scales here. STC, it's important to note that those ratings are at kind of a specific frequency. So frequency is that cycles per second that makes sound different. You know what I mean? Low frequency versus high frequency. When you see an STC rating, it's usually a rating of the middle range, the things that happen most in our daily life. And that product is going to perform differently at different frequencies. It performs particularly poorly at low-level frequencies.
Mostly, yeah. It's very common, like wall assemblies, other construction that we do. It's just freaking hard to block out low sound. So when you see this summary single STC number, I guess, just to elaborate a little bit on what Jake was saying, like a full STC chart is actually what gets done for official STC
It's a whole curve,
ratings. There's a giant curve that shows exactly how much sound is being blocked over all these different frequencies. And then for marketing purposes, the people who manufacture these materials take that and summarize it into one number.
One pretty number that looks real nice.
Yep. And just like we were saying, that number tends to be skewed more towards the mid-range, which means all of those loud vibrational noises from buses and from motorcycles and bass from speakers kind of gets left out of that single number summary. And unfortunately, that's also the stuff that gets into float tanks the easiest.
Yeah, they are very pervasive. And I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Like it's much easier to resonate a material, 100 times per second than it is like 1,000 times per second. So sound, just being energy that's going through the air and also through building materials, it's going to resonate at a certain frequency. And if that happens, the sound gets through. So what do we do to kind of like battle some of this? We employ a couple different types of soundproofing. We don't just do one single wall. We're going to incorporate an air gap in between those walls, and then we're going to use very heavy, very dense walls it's going to be very difficult for those materials to resonate.
Interesting note too, the distance of the air gap between your walls actually affects the frequencies that are allowed to go through there. You can kind of think like blowing over the top of a bottle.
Absolutely.
Which is, the more space there is in between there, the lower that note gets, right? Like once you've drank most of the Coke bottle all the way down, all of a sudden you have a really low noise.
You know how musical Ashkahn is? You should hear him with a bottle, like 3 bottles. He can do amazing things with like 3 different bottles.
Yeah, but he also really likes drinking beverages, so eventually they just all end up the same tone. Anyway, so that's what's going on with the air gap there. You can actually kind of custom tailor your air gap to resonate for different frequencies, or even adjust the width of the air gap going in your walls with skewed
you could even splay it by a few degrees.
You're not like doubling down on a single frequency. Anyway, this is like a little advanced tips. Feel free to jot that down in your notebook.
Jot it down. Splay your walls a few degrees so that you don't have perfectly parallel walls.
What does splay mean? Sorry, so we go off on like crazy jargon rants sometimes during the construction ones.
It's all interesting. It's all tied together. These are tough categories. Often I'll get asked, how wide should this gap be in between these walls? 1 inch is kind of that minimum that we see when people are building out spaces. We see people building up to a couple inches. Some people are like, well, what if I just do like 16 inches? And I'm like, you could do that. You're wasting a lot of square footage in your space. And I don't know where you hit diminishing returns, right? You might be able to achieve perfectly good soundproofing at like 3, 4, or 5 inch gap.
Even different kind of sound studios and experts for them disagree about exactly how wide that gap should be. Within reason. Obviously, if you had walls that were a mile apart, that would be way better for soundproofing, right? But like within that range of a couple inches to a foot or two, there's some disagreement exactly about
definitely.
where you hit diminishing
I think a lot of it
returns.
comes down to budget as well too, right? Like you only have so much space within a plug
You can't have
center.
the mile thick walls. Okay, so back to Decibels and STC. I guess just to kind of put it in some kind of understandable range for people. The sort of decibel scale goes from you can actually have negative decibels, which is kind of crazy. 0 is just like the human calibrated
threshold
range of decibels. Yeah, so 0 is where human hearing doesn't pick anything up anymore. So you can go to negative decibels, and it just means it was already below our realm of hearing, but now scientifically it's even lower in volume than that. Around
very heady.
Yeah, around 30 decibels is where it starts to just kind of be a lot of your average everyday noises going on. At around 50, 60 decibels, you're getting into loud noises. At around 70 decibels, that's actually where you start getting into the realm of like loud construction, really loud music coming through. If you're exposed to that continuously for a day, you can start to cause hearing damage. And that kind of just scales up from there, to, around 85, 90, you start getting into the realm of, well, now if you're like really close to heavy construction and you're there for even an hour without protection, you could get hearing damage. And 140 is kind of the top range of what you even see summarized, because 140 for humans is where it's just immediate hearing damage. If you hit 140 decibels, bam, it's like you're right next to a jet engine and like you might go deaf kind of thing.
Start bleeding out of your ears.
Yeah, and your dynamite that went off if it starts getting louder than that.
So
that's kind of the range of decibels.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that? I was
Not
going
the
to
decibels.
summarize.
Yeah, as long as we
STC
jump into
well.
STC, that's where my brain runs to. Mainly because we see things in STC ratings. You'll see some marketing, unpackaging, talking about it blocks out this many decibels or whatever. But the majority of what you see on packaging is STC ratings.
Yeah, and that's again, it's how soundproof something is. So you tend to focus more on what your wall can do rather than what it's trying to block. So when you're getting materials, things like that, that's why you see STC represented more in that scenario than decibels. But again, if you're actually bringing in an acoustical engineer to run sound tests in your space and see how loud it is inside without any soundproofing, that's where he might start bringing up decibels. So STCs, this kind of goes in a range too, from 0 up to, we'll just say around 70, 80 functionally for what you're hitting. And, 30 to 40 STC rating. That's like when you're in an apartment, they're like, wow, that place has thin walls. That's what they're talking about is
they're watching sort of Judge Judy.
Range. Yeah, exactly. You can totally tell through the walls that Judge Judy is on next door. And then if you go
so relevant?
from 40 to 50 is once again twice as soundproof within a certain range of frequencies. Not to belabor that point. And that's where you get to the point where, you can kind of hear music. If someone just has a really boisterous voice, and you have an STC 50 wall between your lobby and that first float room, and someone's talking really
low
loudly.
Voice as well.
Yep, male, boisterous voice. You can probably totally hear them in room one, a little faintly. Then you start getting up to, 55, 60 STC. That's where really what you can hear is the bass coming through and loud music, and you can't even really hear loud conversation, which is great.
And this is kind of our goal, too. Like, we're trying to get into these 60s. I mean, it's not likely in the real world. And, you can just spend a lot of money. There's a large jump between that 40, 50, STC rating, what you're going to spend on soundproofing, trying to get up into those 60s and those 70s, right?
Yeah, and just keep in mind, too, if we're talking about going from 40 to 50, we're talking about not raising it up by 25%. We're talking about 100% increase in soundproofing. And so now if you're going from 40 to 60, that's 4 times as soundproof. So although these numbers kind of sound like smaller increases, the effect is quite big because of that logarithmic scale.
Yeah, that's a logarithmic scale there. Similar to pH.
Yep, so a lot of sound studios aim for that, 60, 65 kind of range is what they're going for. And it's unfortunate that that's really hard to get to because we kind of, in an ideal world, a float center would be even higher in STC rating because a sound studio needs to be quiet when there's loud instruments in there making noise, and a float tank studio needs to be quiet when it's absolutely silent, which is almost sort of like a whole nother level of demand, So, but that's the goal. Again, somewhere between 50 and 65, if you can hit it, is great. Obviously, above 60 is really nice, but now we're talking about needing, the difference between hitting 50 and hitting 60 or 65 is a huge investment in money. You're talking about really upping that quality of materials to get to sound recording studio level.
Several layers of, soundproofing drywall and stuff, yeah.
So this is also interesting, I guess, going back to the question, which is more important, decibels or STC rating?
You're going to see more STC ratings in your day-to-day operation, I guess?
Yeah, I guess if you're going to research one and get really familiar with it and what it is.
But if you want to get a little esoteric about it, if I didn't have the decibels blasting at me, the STC wouldn't matter, right? Yeah. So, they're the problem, those decibels out there.
They also are related. It would be really nice if there was a direct relation and you can just say, an STC rating is how many decibels get blocked from one area to another.
That would be nice.
But again, STC happens on this curve of frequencies. It doesn't quite work like that. There's no straight equation. That said, layman's just easy summary projections. The STC is roughly the amount of decibels that you're blocking.
Very rough.
Yeah. So just for your raw understanding and rough calculations, if you had 80 decibels in one room and then you went and measured the decibel level in an adjacent room and it was down at 50, you'd call that 30 STC was what that wall assembly would be. Again, in rough calculations. If you actually went to measure it, it would probably be higher or lower. Yeah.
The acoustical engineer will be straightening her tie, and she might be looking down on that statement. But
yeah, exactly. But rough idea. That's kind of the relation, at least. It gives you an idea of how to think about them. And yeah, I guess some last words on it, which is just, again, be careful about those frequencies. A single STC rating is a summary, not a qualification of quality. Just
realize that
quality
you have
words right
multiple
there.
ways to hit that STC rating.
Yep.
Like different systems are going to get you there.
And also keep in mind your soundproofing is only as good as the weakest part of your soundproofing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you invest in these really nice soundproof, high-quality walls, and then you install just like a flimsy hollow core door, you just spent a lot of money on not a whole lot, right? Like the walls are not actually, all the sound is going to skirt around the walls and just go in through your door area. So
also keep in mind when those companies send their materials off to be tested, they're testing them in just like pristine environments, laboratory environments. They've built it perfectly. Like they're not going to send off a material that is flawed to be tested. So it's really
and they're
hard.
paying a lot of money for these tests, so you can be sure, and they really want to hit the highest number possible so they can brag about it. So yeah, their assemblies when they get them tested.
I guess what we're saying is that it will never be as good as they created in the laboratory.
No. Yeah, so. if you buy STC 60 kind of grade materials or you're putting together an assembly that's supposed to be STC 60, just knock that down a little bit for the fact that the environment is a hard thing to deal with. I think that's about it. I guess just relatively, if we're talking about changes in STC, you're comparing, you're like, oh, should I get something that's STC 47 or something that's STC 50?
Oh, yeah.
How big is that difference? Mm-hmm. So usually a one STC change is imperceptible.
Nothing.
Like you can't really tell the difference. So if you're
same with decibels, you can't tell the difference at 1
no.
decibel. Like that's
in fact, in sound studios, we typically kind of round to 3 decibels just because 1 is a little beyond the range of human hearing.
Yeah.
So you'll see those kind of pop up a lot. So 1 imperceptible, about 3 change in STC is perceptible, but
very
it's not
noticeable.
A huge difference. A 5 is really where you like a five difference. You start to notice it, and you can actually tell. Oh, this is a bit more soundproof. That's where it might be worthwhile. So now, if you're talking about the difference between 50 to 55, 45 to 50 for STC, that might be worth investing in. And then again, if you get up to a 10 STC difference, that's going to be twice as soundproof or twice as unsoundproof or whatever the antonym is right there.
Noisy. Huh?
Yeah, twice as noisy. There we go. Unsoundproof was close though, I think. Yeah, all right. And there you go. There's a little STC decibel summary.
Yeah, thanks for coming down the rabbit hole with us. We appreciate it.
It goes so much deeper. Yeah. All right, and if you have questions of your own, go to floatanksolutions.com/podcast. And we will go and read them out loud to everyone else in the world and share answers to them.
Our answers.
Which is the premise of this very podcast. All right, have a great one, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.